Growing up, I always liked spending time doing things on my own, to explore and learn and figure things out. Even though I liked to play with friends and go to their houses, sometimes I would say no, just because I thought it would be too tiring. After all, while being around others is amazing, how much more do I still have to explore whenever I can focus on my own at the world around me? Being alone, solitude and loneliness are almost always mentioned with negative connotation, and a lot of the time they are. But it's weird how I can sometimes feel loneliness grasp me with that normal negative intensity, but then in the next moment, it can feel like a refreshing and constant breeze, a breath of fresh air. I got Breath of the Wild far after a lot of people, just getting it this last Christmas, but I have over 300 hours in, with, of course, all of the shrines and most of my armor upgraded. I will probably 100% complete it someday, but I'm in no rush. I've spent time just stockpiling items I have no idea the use for, getting thousands of rupees, but not having anything to buy that warrants me gathering them, and of course, cooking dishes just because I think the icon looks cool. Still, where I may have gotten to this point and burnt out with other games, Breath of the Wild hasn't needed to keep me occupied with specific tasks or goals. Just riding my bike around, looking around at the gorgeous scenery and taking note of the small instrumental cues that have played so many times. The blowing grass, the birds and bugs, it just doesn't feel like a breathing world. It feels like one created from a dream. So peaceful, relaxing, and beautiful, but at the same time brooding and empty. It's filled to the brim with things to do. The map is stocked full. It may seem like a contradiction. The various stables and main villages, adventurers you may find on the roads. You are certainly not alone. There are a lot of people to talk to, just like in the real world, but most of that time is spent running through the grass without a person in sight. With the ominous, violent remains of guardians, temples, houses, all peacefully engulfed in the new green force of nature's life. Aside from Zelda, all of the champions and major past characters are dead too. It's 100 years past from the true events of the game, so it's sort of like the whole world has moved on without you. Almost none of the people alive you see are from your time. They are a whole new generation, or generations. One that have mostly grown up without any recollections of how Hyrule used to be before Ganon, the time that you lived. The point is, it's this sort of somber tone mixed with the refreshing beauty that sets such an accurate idea for what Breath of the Wild feels like. It's low-key, it's calm, it's foreboding, but it sees no hurry. It's such a strong emotional pull that days after getting it, when I spent almost a week to myself, I found myself getting emotional just standing still and hearing the sounds of the fake nature around me. It was sort of like, that's me. That's how I have felt. How I feel. Put on a screen. Drawn with a machine. Programmed into sight. It's how I felt and how I feel. It's such a strong feeling that even now, nearly 3 months later, I still play the game, and after much deliberation, finally went out and purchased a capture card just so I could legally record and talk about it on my system. I grew up in a house with a small wooded area behind us and a field nearby the house. There was open land and the open blue sky as far as you could see. Stars, the moon always in sight with clouds rarely obscuring them and leaving perfectly squiggled dark spots on the grass below. I spent so much time as a kid, growing up, adventuring further and further, finding old rusted things, cinder blocks of torn down buildings, pretending to fight monsters and discover new foods. This sort of imagination and amazement that I loved. The world felt so big even if it was just the small area around my house. So much freedom and adventure, so many things to discover. I miss that as the cynical adult aspects of the world wiggle their way in. As responsibilities pile on and deadlines become more plentiful, it's something you can always think back to but can't imagine capturing again. I got so into Breath of the Wild through January that I spent days on YouTube watching lore videos, and just anything where people would talk about the game. And while I can't remember the video or videos exactly that mentioned it, I found out this feeling and connection I was having with the game was likely very similar to the original goal that Shigeru Miyamoto put out when he made the first game in the series. I can't find the exact interview quote, but many places seem to say that Miyamoto's inspiration for the series was his exploration around caves, forests, and fields as a kid. Him doing exactly what I did. Well, except for the cave part. I had never really felt this way about Zelda when playing The Wind Waker, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Minish Cap, the ones that I'd played the most growing up and really enjoy, but the feeling that Breath of the Wild gives is so different, distinct, and amazing. Not comparing it as better or worse, but beyond comparing. It feels like it's in a complete separate unit. The gorgeous vistas, even 900 Korok seeds, tons of sets of armor, and especially the rubber fish suit helmet, which is the greatest thing ever created, and I will pay money to own a real one. It's just brimming with creativity and charm. It doesn't feel like it is trying to be kid-like or trying to be adult. It just feels like what a fantasy world would be like if it was drenched in a dreamy, wide-eyed sense of adventure. My favorite place on the entire map in Breath of the Wild is in a place that is by most accounts fairly unremarkable. In fact, I hadn't even stumbled upon it once until after I was finished with all the divine beasts and was collecting and looking for the rest of the shrines. It's the moment and the place that finally really made me take it all in, unlike before. In the smaller field behind Hyrule Castle, there's a hilly area of its own that sits with nothing particularly more breathtaking than other locations. Some flowers surround a tree, and it just sits there by itself, swaying. This area, this place in particular, feels like it understands me. Like, this really gets it. In the field by my house, just disconnected from the woods, we have our own little single tree standing in the field. I used to call it the Tree of Knowledge or Wisdom or something. Point is, for some reason I really loved this single tree, and the way it was separated so beautifully from the bunch made me feel like it had some sort of strange, unique characteristic, even if it didn't. The other trees exist, and we're not far from it, but it was still alone, a solitary tree. It feels like the version of the field and forest by my house that I had imagined as a kid is able to be revisited once again by me, albeit in this game. Just like how I'm not truly alone with people nearby, how Zelda has plenty of villages and people on the paths, but still, while there is this sense of connectedness, the calm breeze, the refreshing lone feeling is captured there, and perfectly in the game as well. This somewhat humble spot is my favorite place in Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild is really vast and awesome, and absolutely gorgeous at times. I don't know how many other ways I can possibly stress it. Plenty, I'm sure, actually. But in terms of the full range and scope of what it means to be alone, the positive and the negative feelings, I can't think of much else that better captures that idea. I would say that this version of Hyrule is a place I'd like to visit in real life, but I feel like, even if it was far in the past, I've already been there. Sorry for the long break. Things will be back in full force posting videos after this one. I just took off because it was spring break and my birthday, and then I got sick. I'm actually still a little bit sick, so I hope my voice isn't too bad. Thanks so much for watching to the end, and if you feel so kind, I would really appreciate you doing the same thing that Whizbang2093, Akio, Rakamaro, Darren Antos, Seydot, Dave Pokemon, and all of these other amazing people have done by supporting me on Patreon. New mob video next Friday, and until then, I hope your week is a good one.